it's very natural that mankind enjoys stories. You know,
Mhm.
a good homily. I don't always do this very well. I'm not a great storyteller, but those who are good storytellers tend to be very good homilists because stories kind of grip us in, and a lot of times stories will help reveal things that are not otherwise explainable. This is why really good literature, it takes somebody very brilliant to do. Like Dostoevsky was beyond brilliant. I read a criticism of once where somebody says, you don't have to be brilliant to write stories. You're just writing stories about people. Well, if you write if you don't understand people, and in Dostoevsky's case, if you don't understand God, then you can write nonsensical stuff that won't mean anything to anyone. But the
Mhm.
reason that stories resonate is because they speak to deeper truths, whether we realize that or not. In fact, I was talking to one of my parishioners the other day, and I forget how we got on this topic. It's not exactly a topic I discuss a lot, but I was telling him why Beauty and the Beast is my favorite of the Disney movies, the Disney cartoons, and I was explaining to him the story in terms of the Orthodox view of virtues versus passions. And he
Mhm.
goes, "You should do a video on this." And I went, "I don't really. It's not really like I don't like talking pop culture a lot. It's not really my way." But the more I thought about it, he kind of encouraged me. I was like, I think I might actually at some point talk about why it is that I really like this one because there's an incredible interplay of and think I'll tell you a little preview of this. There are two beasts in the story. There's the beast who was the prince Belle falls in love with, but there's also Gaston.
That's right.
And what's the difference between the beasts? One of them sees his bestiality. He sees his beast. Maybe that's not the right word for it, but it is
Good.
his beast likeness, and
Mhm.
he becomes depressed over it because he knows what he should be and doesn't know a way out.
Mhm.
In order to find a way out, he needs to find love, but he's too self-focused in his own depression. The other one embraces his beast likeness and thinks that that's what his true self is. Gaston ends up being a much more beastly figure than the beast himself.
Yeah.
And this is how we can work with sin and the passions. And so there's a lot more that we could talk about with that. But you're absolutely right. Mankind, and this is also one other thing about this. This is also why I think so much of the scriptures are in stories. I think that at the time that the apostles were living, most people weren't reading and writing. How did they learn things? Through public preaching.
Yeah.
And I think that the mankind's brain is actually hardwired to learn through stories and verbal descriptions. But we've lost that because we have the written word, and now we have technology like cell phones and iPads and stuff. And so, well, think about it. If you grew up with none of that, when you heard a story that revealed some greater truth, you'd remember that story.
Yeah.
I can barely I My favorite jokes I barely remember anymore because now when I forget something, I go to my phone, I look it up. It
Yeah.
takes no effort. And by the time my phone's off, I've forgotten it again. It's just out, there's no work involved in learning these things anymore. So I think we're hardwired for stories. And I think that some people, you mentioned Campbell, there's, Pajot, Dr. Peterson. I think people are starting to rediscover
I
the
think
the
so.
significance of story and symbolism and how much that actually affects us without us even realizing it, and how much it's shaped the way that we think about ourselves, think about God, think about our relation with others, and with the divine. And I'm glad it's being rediscovered. And I'm glad that we're kind of rediscovering the significance and the power of story. I hope it's a trend that continues.
Yeah, well, I mean, I almost feel like these archetypes are a way by which the story can get passed on, and that you can play around with the details, therefore, like being able to circumvent the problem of forgetting. And actually, going back to the Beauty and the Beast, it's interesting because even it almost says that it takes a beast of a man to be able to combat another beast of a man who's more pathological and what's the word? It's like a sociopath, right? Which would be Gaston in this way. But then that's what a woman would actually prefer. It's like a man that's able to tame his own beast side, and that's what is required in society to be able to keep the psychopath at bay. Which means that that whole story could also be a representation of that. So like again, it's all of these stories have so much depth to them. I do want to get your perspective though on some of the archetypes that are present within the Bible that are also present in other ancient traditions and stories. So, for example, the fact that Jesus was born of a virgin is something that we encounter in other traditions. How do you explain that from the point of view of orthodoxy?
Yeah, the expectations of the nations. It's funny when people say like uh, they also do this with the Old Testament. They say, "Oh, there's flood stories all over the world," and my
Right.
response to that is, "How is that evidence against the flood? Isn't that evidence in
If
favor of
anything,
the flood?"
for it,
Like,
yeah.
so I think that there were expectations of the nations, and the fact that you know it's one of the things that people say about the Gnostic Gospels. They find that we take a lot of stories from these Gospels that we otherwise reject, but we accept certain stories from them. For instance, there's a lot of traditions about what happened, like with Joachim and Anna, the parents of the Virgin Mary, how they became to be pregnant with the Virgin Mary, how she was born, what happened to her afterwards, and they say, well, you took this from the Gnostic Gospels, and my response to that is always, if you were a Gnostic author at that time, do you think you would just make everything up out of the blue? No one would
Hmm.
believe anything. No, what you do is you take traditions that have been passed around and then you twist them to meet your religious ideology.
Right.
So you take existing things that are true and then twist them to fit what you want. So what the church has done is it said these aspects are actually the true aspects and these ones are not. These are the parts we reject. We can't accept the gospel as a whole. Gospel of Judas, Gospel of Mary Magdalene, all these different things because it's written from a Gnostic perspective, but it doesn't mean that everything written in them is false. And so imagine if there really is spiritual warfare all around us. Imagine if the demons are trying to lead us astray. Do you think they're going to whisper 100 lies in your ear? You would never trust them. What
Hmm.
they're going to do is whisper 99 truths and one lie. And through that one lie, that cancer is going to spread. And so what do they do? Where did pagan beliefs come from? The demons. The demons were the pagan gods. The pagan gods were not nothing, they were demons. And the demons whispered in true things so that man's heart, that natural yearning we talked about, would latch onto those. But with it, it infected lies into the midst of it. And so now we're left with a bunch of, so-called pagan myths that people say, well, Christianity is just one of many. And my response is no. This is a revelation and good evidence that the Christian story is true. These were the expectations of the nations that had been twisted by the demons, not just wiped clear, because that wouldn't work. I joke with my kids all the time. When I make up something for them, they know I'm joking. But if I really want to trick them, I tell them a bunch of true stuff, and then I put one little twist in there, and they go, "Really?" And then I go, "No, not really."
Hmm.
That's how you do it. That's how the demons work with us. Well, of course, for more devious means, not just to play around with our kids.
Right. Right. Well, okay. So then, is it true that Satan or the devil is the one who is at the pinnacle of the hierarchy here on Earth? Because I've heard that perspective many times. I don't know what the Bible would say about that, and where that even originates.
So again, this is one of those orthodox answers. The answer is yes and no.
I
Um,
see. Okay.
the reason it's yes is because although Satan is called the prince of this world or the prince of this age, the ruler of this world, the ruler of the air, different kind of names given for him. Saint John Chrysostom. In fact, I just this morning recorded a little video that I posted right before we started, and I talked about this. Why is Satan called the ruler of this age? Because we allow him to be through sin.
Mm.
Through sin, we've opened up the way for him to rule. If we cease sinning, he is no longer ruler over us. Your heart is going to have a ruler. That ruler will either be Satan or God. It's your choice. And so, as long as we continue on in sin and embracing sin, we allow Satan to be the ruler of our hearts. And when enough people do that, we allow him to be the ruler of this age. So he's been, just like a false ruler is propped up. If he has enough supporters, we've propped up the devil as the ruler of this age. But we can conquer him. We can dethrone him, shove him off his throne, and place Christ rightly back on his throne when we live lives of righteousness.